He froze outside his son's bedroom door. The black maid was kneeling beside the wheelchair, whispering words that made the air tremble, and within seconds, his paralyzed son's fingers began to move. Atlanta mornings had a way of looking expensive. Even the sunlight seemed to pour differently through the Whitmore estate, pale gold, polite, filtered through glass windows tall enough to hold secrets. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and money, and every sound, the hum of a refrigerator, the clicking of heels on marble, felt rehearsed. Naomi Brooks moved through that silence like a ghost in uniform. Her black shoes whispered against the polished floor as she arranged silverware for breakfast, her hands steady, her face unreadable. She had been working here for 6 weeks, and in that time, she'd learned that invisibility was the first rule of survival. The Whitmores liked things clean, quiet, and distant, including their help. She smoothed the tablecloth, straightened the knife, adjusted the glass stem by a fraction of an inch. Her reflection in the silverware stared back, dark skin, soft eyes, and hair tied neatly beneath her cap. She smiled at herself, just to remember what it felt like. "Naomi," came a voice behind her. Smooth, cold, dipped in authority. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore glided into the dining room, her silk robe swaying as if she never walked anywhere, she simply arrived. Her smile was polite, practiced, and heavy with unspoken judgment. "Good morning," she said, picking up a napkin to inspect it. "You do such a wonderful job here. You really brighten the room." Naomi nodded, softly. "Thank you, ma'am." "But," Margaret continued, tilting her head with that gentle cruelty money gives people, "do you think you could wear a lighter shade of lipstick? Something less bold. It's just that the color, well, it draws a lot of attention during breakfast." Naomi's smile faltered, but only for a second. "Of course, ma'am," she said. "I understand." Margaret rewarded her compliance with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, then floated out of the room. Naomi stood there, still holding a plate, her hand trembling slightly. The wordless sting of it spread through her chest. She turned toward the window, looking out at the rolling lawn, the sun catching on the edges of her reflection, her face framed in wealth that would never belong to her. A voice interrupted her thoughts, small, hollow. "It's just lipstick." Naomi turned. At the far end of the table sat Ethan Whitmore, the Whitmores' 14-year-old son. His wheelchair was parked near the sunlight, his thin hands resting on the armrests, motionless. His blue eyes didn't quite meet hers, but he was looking, that alone felt like a miracle. She smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Ethan." He didn't answer. His gaze shifted toward the window again, 1,000 yards away. Naomi could sense the weight of his silence, not rebellion, but sadness buried too deep to touch. "Mr. Charles Whitmore entered moments later, tall, commanding, his gray suit sharper than the tone in his voice. He gave Naomi a glance so brief it might have been a warning. "The eggs aren't runny this time, are they?" "No, sir." "Good." He sat at the head of the table, opened a newspaper, and began speaking to no one in particular. "We've got the press coming this week. I want this place spotless, not a fingerprint anywhere." "Yes, sir." Naomi moved like clockwork, refilling his coffee, folding napkins, taking orders with precision. But when she looked at Ethan again, she noticed him watching her, really watching this time. When she smiled at him, a faint twitch crossed his lips, almost invisible, but there. After breakfast, as she cleared the table, she passed behind his wheelchair and whispered softly, "You did good today." His fingers stirred slightly on the tray, not enough to notice, but enough for her to feel it. Later that afternoon, Naomi was dusting the library when she overheard voices down the hall. Charles's tone was low but laced with irritation. "The therapist says he's not improving. I don't want anyone filling his head with nonsense, not staff, not tutors. He needs discipline, not pity." Margaret's softer voice followed. "He's just a boy, Charles." "He's a Whitmore," Charles snapped. "And I won't have him grow soft." Naomi froze, the feather duster trembling in her hand. Their words cut through her, not because they were new, but because they were familiar. She'd grown up hearing similar tones aimed at her own son, Malik, whenever teachers mistook his quietness for trouble. She recognized the sound of people mistaking power for care. That evening, when the house fell quiet, Naomi passed by Ethan's door again. It was slightly open. Inside, the boy sat alone, staring at his reflection in the glass window, a pale ghost of himself against the night. She wanted to say something, anything, but the rule of her job pressed down harder than her heart. She was the help. Not family. Not friend. Not even human enough to speak without permission. So she simply whispered from the doorway, "You're not invisible, sweetheart." He didn't answer, but she saw the faintest movement, his eyes flicked toward her voice, like he was searching for proof that he wasn't alone. Naomi backed away quietly, heart aching. As she walked down the corridor, her reflection followed her, a tired woman carrying 1,000 unspoken words in a house that rewarded silence. In her small servant's room that night, she untied her cap and let her hair fall loose. She thought about Mrs. Whitmore's smile, about the lipstick she'd scrubbed off before dinner. She thought about Ethan's empty eyes and Charles's sharp voice. Outside her window, the estate glowed like a monument to something hollow. Naomi whispered to herself, barely audible, "They see everything, except the truth." Then she turned off the light. The night stretched long in the Whitmore mansion, cold and still. Naomi had learned that silence there wasn't peace, it was control. Every footstep echoed too loudly, every breath reminded her she didn't belong. But on that quiet Wednesday evening, something pulled her toward the boys' room again, something stronger than the rules that kept her obedient. She hesitated at the door, her hand resting on the polished brass handle. A faint sound slipped through the crack, soft, broken sobs. She pushed gently, and the door creaked open just enough for her to see Ethan slumped sideways in his wheelchair, his eyes red and wet. He didn't notice her at first. His voice came out small, shaking. "I wish I didn't wake up that day." Naomi's chest tightened. "Don't say that, baby." He startled, his gaze snapping to her. "You're not supposed to be here." "I know," she said, stepping inside anyway. "But I heard you crying." Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. "Everyone treats me like I'm glass. Except my dad, he just doesn't look at me at all." His voice cracked on the last word. "I hate it here." Naomi knelt beside him, the dim lamplight catching her face. Her voice softened into something melodic. "My grandma used to say, when a heart feels too heavy, you gotta whisper some of the weight out. The world listens if you talk to it gentle enough." He stared at her, curious but skeptical. "Like prayer?" "Something like that," she said with a faint smile. "You want me to show you?" He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Naomi took his hand carefully, her fingers warm against his cold skin. She closed her eyes and began whispering, low, rhythmic, words older than memory. Her grandmother's gullah prayers flowed like water from her tongue, carrying fragments of hope, strength, and healing. The air in the room seemed to hum softly around them, the candlelight flickering in tune with her breath. Ethan's sobs quieted. His shoulders relaxed. For the first time in months, his breathing steadied into sleep. When Naomi opened her eyes, she didn't move right away. She just watched him, fragile, pale, but alive. She gently placed his hand back on his lap, whispered, "You're gonna be okay," and slipped out. The next morning, Ethan seemed different. He didn't speak much, but his eyes followed Naomi whenever she passed through the room. During lunch, he tried to hold his fork on his own. It clattered to the floor, but Naomi saw something, a flicker of movement in his fingers. She caught his eye and smiled. "Try again tomorrow." For the next few nights, she continued her quiet visits after lights out. She whispered to him, Stories of her grandmother who could make broken things bloom, of her son Malik and his dream to play piano someday, of the world beyond the marble walls. Her voice carried warmth into the cold mansion. And each night, Ethan's hands moved more. His lips tried to form words. The nurses noticed subtle improvements, but no one could explain why. Naomi didn't say a word. She only prayed harder. Then one evening, fate twisted the story. Charles Whitmore came home earlier than usual. The mansion doors slammed like thunder as he barked orders into his phone. He stormed upstairs, furious over a failed business deal. When he reached the hallway near Ethan's room, he heard a sound, Naomi's low whisper, floating through the crack of the door. Curiosity, or suspicion, drew him closer. He peered inside. Naomi knelt beside Ethan's wheelchair, her hand gently holding his. Ethan's fingers trembled as she whispered. The lamp glowed gold over her dark skin, over the boy's pale face, and for a moment, it looked like something sacred. "What the hell is this?" Charles's voice cut through the room like glass shattering. Naomi jumped, spinning toward him. Ethan flinched. "Sir, You were chanting," he roared, stepping inside. "What are you doing to my son?" Naomi's hands shook. "I was just praying with him. He couldn't sleep." "Praying?" Charles scoffed. "That wasn't praying. That was some voodoo nonsense." His eyes burned with contempt. "I should have known better than to trust one of you two." He stopped himself, but the venom in his tone had already said it all. Naomi's throat tightened. She took a step back, tears stinging her eyes. "I would never hurt that boy." Margaret appeared at the door, clutching her robe. "Charles, please." But Charles didn't lower his voice. "Get out of this room. Now." Naomi looked at Ethan. His lips trembled, trying to speak. "Dad, stop." Charles turned on him sharply. "Don't you defend her." Naomi's heart cracked at the sight of the boy's fear. She wanted to reach out to him, but she couldn't. Her hands dropped helplessly to her sides. "I'm sorry," she whispered, backing away. "I didn't mean any harm." Mrs. Whitmore's face was pale with embarrassment. "Naomi," she said coldly, "perhaps it's best if you keep to your assigned areas for now." Naomi nodded slowly, blinking back tears. She turned and left, her steps heavy. Behind her, Charles's harsh voice filled the room again, ordering the nurse to watch Ethan at all times. In her small quarters that night, Naomi packed her suitcase. Her hands trembled as she folded her uniform, her only steady source of income, now gone. But before dawn, she slipped one last time into Ethan's room. The boy was awake, his eyes red but alert. She didn't dare enter. She stood by the doorway and whispered softly, "You're stronger than they think." He blinked, once, twice, and his fingers twitched again. Naomi smiled faintly through her tears. "Keep listening," she said, leaving a folded note on his nightstand before walking away. When the morning light broke through the tall windows, the room was empty. Only the faint scent of her perfume lingered, and a small slip of paper rested beside Ethan's motionless hand. In Naomi's handwriting, it read, "You are not broken. You are waiting to rise." The house felt colder after Naomi left. It wasn't just the marble floors or the endless glass walls, it was the quiet that hung over everything. Ethan barely spoke, and when he did, his words came slow and slurred. His father, Charles, convinced himself it was better that way. Order. Silence. No more of that nonsense whispering in his home. But order had a way of cracking when truth tried to rise. 3 days after Naomi's dismissal, the first thing the staff noticed was that Ethan wasn't sleeping. He stared out his window for hours, whispering words no one could quite hear. Sometimes he smiled faintly, like he was remembering something. Other times he cried without sound. When the doctor arrived for a routine checkup, he frowned. He's showing early signs of voluntary movement in his hands. Have you changed his therapy? Charles's jaw tightened. No. We've done everything exactly as before. The doctor looked intrigued. Well, something's working. Margaret's eyes flickered to her husband, a question she didn't dare voice. That night, when Charles sat in his office drinking whiskey, she confronted him quietly. Charles, she began, what if that woman helped him? He scoffed. Helped him? Please. That woman was brainwashing him with superstition. You think that's medicine? I think, she said carefully, for the first time since the accident, our son looked alive. Charles set down his glass hard enough to crack the edge. He doesn't need her. He needs structure. Real care. Not someone filling his head with folklore. But as he spoke, Ethan's laughter, faint and trembling, echoed from upstairs. When Charles went to check, he found his son holding something in his lap. It was the folded note Naomi had left behind. Charles snatched it away before Ethan could react. He read the words, his lips curling. You are not broken. You are waiting to rise. He crumpled it in his fist, threw it in the trash, and wheeled Ethan back toward his bed. Don't fill your head with that nonsense. Ethan didn't respond. But when his father left, he reached into the trash, smoothed the paper back out, and hid it under his pillow. Days turned into weeks. Naomi's absence became the mansion's unspoken secret, until a small miracle broke through. It happened one rainy afternoon. The nurse, busy adjusting the four-stand, didn't notice Ethan's fingers curling around the armrest. Slowly, shakily, his hand lifted, not much, but enough to make her gasp. Oh my God, she whispered. Mr. Whitmore. He moved. Charles ran into the room, disbelief flooding his face. Ethan. The boy looked up, his eyes bright for the first time in months. Dad, he murmured, I can feel my hand. Margaret burst into tears. Charles froze, torn between awe and confusion. How is this possible? Ethan smiled faintly. Naomi told me to keep listening. The name hit Charles like a slap. He straightened, his pride hardening his expression. Don't ever say that name again. But she helped me. She poisoned you with false hope, he snapped. Your progress is from therapy, not her mumbo-jumbo. Ethan's small voice cut through the room. Then why did it only start after she prayed for me? Charles didn't answer. He turned sharply and walked out. That night, as the storm rolled across the sky, Charles sat alone in his office. Lightning flashed, throwing his reflection against the window, a powerful man haunted by something he couldn't explain. His empire was built on logic, profit, control. But his son's recovery, that was something money couldn't account for. Against his better judgment, he called the agency that had hired Naomi. The maid, Naomi Carter. Where did she go? The woman on the other end hesitated. She left the placement. Said she was moving back to Decatur. She requested no further contact from clients. Charles hung up, frustrated. But in the days that followed, something strange began happening, the boy's recovery accelerated. Every time he repeated Naomi's whispered words, his movements became stronger. He began to speak more clearly, to eat without assistance. And yet, with every step forward Ethan took, Charles's guilt deepened. He started seeing Naomi's face in his mind, her calm eyes, her shaking hands that night. One morning, as Ethan practiced moving his legs in therapy, Charles stood in the doorway, watching. The therapist smiled. He's responding incredibly well. It's like he's fueled by something powerful. Charles muttered, almost to himself, faith. Ethan heard him. Her faith, he corrected softly. That word hung in the air, heavier than any truth money could buy. Charles left the room abruptly. He couldn't escape the gnawing thought, what if he'd been wrong? That evening, after Margaret had gone to bed, he walked into Ethan's room. The boy was awake, staring at the ceiling. "I owe her an apology," Charles said quietly. Ethan turned his head. "Then go give it to her." Charles hesitated. "She won't want to see me." "Maybe not. But you should still try." The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Charles reached for the crumpled note on Ethan's nightstand, still faintly creased. He smoothed it out again. The handwriting was small, graceful, the words still glowing with meaning. "You are not broken. You are waiting to rise." In that moment, something shifted in him, a flicker of shame, of clarity. He saw, for the first time, how his pride and prejudice had blinded him. He nodded slowly, whispering to himself, "Then so am I." By morning, the car was waiting. Charles didn't tell his wife or the staff where he was going. He just told the driver, Decatur. The sun was barely up when they hit the outskirts of the old neighborhood. The streets looked nothing like his world. Cracked sidewalks, worn-down houses, children playing with laughter that carried despite the noise of passing cars. It was another America, one he'd spent his life avoiding. When he finally saw her, Naomi, standing outside a laundromat, her hair tied back and a basket in her hands, he froze. For the first time in his life, the billionaire didn't know how to speak. Charles stepped out of the car, his shoes hitting the cracked pavement like the sound of intrusion. The air here felt different, heavier, alive, honest. He had spent decades surrounded by marble floors and men who called him, sir, but this street, it didn't bend to him. It just existed. Naomi didn't notice him at first. She was bent over, helping an elderly woman lift her laundry basket from the curb. When she straightened, her eyes caught the reflection of a sleek black car and a man in a tailored suit standing beside it. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then she did. Her face froze, not in fear, but disbelief. "Mr. Whitmore." Her voice trembled slightly, though her spine stayed straight. He took a hesitant step forward. "Naomi." She didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the basket handle. "What are you doing here?" He glanced around, his voice lowering as if the world might overhear. "I came to apologize." Naomi blinked, confused. "Apologize?" He nodded. "For what I said. For how I treated you. For everything." The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like he'd never practiced them before. People apologized to Charles Whitmore, not the other way around. Naomi's expression didn't soften. She set down the basket, her jaw firm. "You accused me of witchcraft in front of your child. You called me one of those people. Then you fired me for caring about your son." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't hide it. Charles lowered his head. "I know. And I can't take that back. But I need you to know, he's healing. He's moving again. Talking. The doctors can't explain it. But I can." Naomi studied him, the corners of her eyes glistening. "Ethan?" He nodded. "He said you told him to keep listening. To believe. I threw your note away, he kept it. I was wrong, Naomi. So wrong." A long silence hung between them. The sounds of the city filled the space, car horns, voices, the rhythm of life that didn't care for wealth or guilt. Finally, Naomi sighed. "You ever wonder why people like me whisper when we pray?" Charles frowned. "Why?" "Because the world's loud with hate," she said softly. "And sometimes, you gotta speak to what's good so quietly that only heaven hears you." He swallowed hard. Her words hit him like confession. "Naomi. I didn't know how to see you." Her gaze held his. "No, you didn't want to." The honesty in her tone sliced through him. He had no defense, Just the truth he'd avoided all his life. "Ethan wants to see you," he said finally. "If you'll come back." Naomi looked away, her chest tightening. The thought of that house, its sterile air, its quiet judgment, made her shiver. "That place isn't for me." "He's not the same boy," Charles said quickly. "And I'm not the same man." She studied his face, the deep lines, the eyes no longer filled with arrogance but something fragile. "Regret, maybe. People don't change that fast, Mr. Whitmore." He hesitated. "Maybe not. But sometimes a moment can start it." Naomi looked past him, at the city skyline glowing faintly in the distance. "If I go, it's for that boy. Not for you." He nodded. "That's fair." When she finally agreed, it wasn't with a handshake, but a silence between two people who understood the cost of forgiveness. The drive back to the mansion felt like two worlds colliding. Naomi stared out the window, her heart pounding. Every street they passed was another memory, of mopping marble floors, of Ethan's laughter, of the night she was thrown out like a criminal. When the gates opened, she almost asked to turn back. But then she saw him. Ethan sat in his wheelchair near the garden, sunlight pooling around him like gold. When he saw her, his entire face lit up. His hand, trembling but determined, lifted in greeting. "Naomi." Her eyes filled instantly. She hurried toward him, dropping to her knees beside the chair. "Look at you," she whispered, touching his hand gently. "You did it." "I tried every day," he said proudly. "I remembered your stories. I whispered them like you taught me." Charles stood a few feet behind them, his hands clasped tightly, as if holding himself together. Watching them, he felt something crack open inside, something he didn't have a name for. For the next few hours, Naomi stayed with Ethan. They talked, laughed, and even prayed quietly together again. This time, Charles didn't interrupt. He just stood at the door, listening, not to the words, but to the feeling in them. That evening, as the house grew dim, Charles called for the household staff. The same people who had whispered rumors about Naomi now stood in a half-circle around the foyer. Naomi turned, confused. Charles took a breath, his voice steady but thick. "All of you saw what happened weeks ago. You saw me accuse this woman of something shameful. I let my ignorance speak louder than reason." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. "She saved my son," Charles continued. "When doctors failed, she gave him what none of us could, faith." He turned to Naomi. "You didn't deserve what I did to you. And if you'll allow it, I'd like to make it right." Naomi's throat tightened. "You can't undo it." "No," he admitted, "but I can face it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. "I've already written a statement, to the agency, to the press. The world will know the truth. Not about my money, but about my mistake." The air in the room shifted. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide but calm. "Charles," she whispered, "are you sure?" He looked up at her. "For once, yes." For the first time, the mansion didn't feel like his. It felt like a place finally breathing again. Naomi stood there. Speechless, trembling, her hands clasped before her. She had spent her life being quiet in rooms like this, careful not to exist too loudly. And now, the man who once reduced her to silence was giving her voice space to echo. She nodded slowly. "Then I forgive you." Charles exhaled, tears gathering in his eyes. "Thank you." But forgiveness wasn't the end, it was the start of something new neither of them fully understood yet. That night, when Naomi left the mansion once more, Ethan waved from the balcony, his fingers steady and strong. She smiled up at him, pride shining brighter than the lights that glowed behind the mansion walls. And for the first time in a long time, Charles didn't look down on the world, he looked up. Weeks passed, and the Whitmore estate became quieter in a different way, not from control, but reflection. The story Charles had released to the press made its rounds faster than he expected. Headlines bloomed across major outlets. Billionaire admits to firing Black Maid over racial bias, credits her for son's miraculous recovery. The world that once bowed to him now stared with judgment. Reporters camped outside the gates, eager for a statement. Former colleagues called to distance themselves, some to congratulate his bravery, others to criticize his weakness. But for the first time, Charles didn't care about perception. For the first time, he cared about truth. Inside the house, Ethan's recovery continued at a pace no one could explain. The boy who had been locked inside his body for nearly a year now walked short distances on his own. His laughter carried through the hallways that had once held only whispers. Naomi visited twice a week, not as staff, but as family. She would sit by the window, tell Ethan stories about her grandmother's old remedies, her son Malik's mischievous adventures, and the way prayers worked in quiet, steady rhythms. One evening, as they sat together, Ethan looked up at her. "Naomi, when I get better, can I meet your son?" She smiled softly. "You'd like him. He's loud and stubborn, a lot like you." Ethan grinned. "Then I'll teach him how to walk tall, like me." The laughter between them filled the room, and outside the door, Charles watched unseen. There was a peace in the sight, a kind of redemption money couldn't purchase. But peace, he knew, wasn't permanent. It had to be earned daily. The following week, Charles received an invitation from a major media outlet requesting an on-camera interview about his public reckoning. His PR team begged him to decline, fearing reputational ruin. But Charles saw it differently. This was his chance to face the world the way Naomi had faced him, unguarded, real. The interview aired live from his study. The lights were harsh, the cameras merciless. The host didn't waste time. "Mr. Whitmore, the public was shocked by your admission. Why go public now?" Charles folded his hands, voice calm. "Because silence protects the powerful. I've been silent too long." The interviewer leaned forward. "You accused a black woman of witchcraft. That word carries centuries of history, fear, violence, racism. What made you say it?" Charles's throat tightened. "Because I was raised to believe I was above people like her. I thought my wealth made me right. I saw a woman praying for my son and called it dark magic, because her faith didn't look like mine." The room went still. Even the crew looked shaken. The interviewer asked quietly, "And what changed?" "My son," Charles said simply. "He healed not because of science or privilege, but because a woman I disrespected gave him something I never could, hope." The interviewer hesitated. "What would you say to her now?" Charles looked directly into the camera. "Naomi Carter, I'm sorry. And I thank you. You showed me that faith doesn't need permission, and kindness doesn't need a witness." By the time the interview ended, social media had exploded. Some people mocked him, others called his apology performative. But one clip, a still frame of Charles saying, "Hope doesn't need a witness," went viral. And among the noise, one quiet voice emerged, Naomi's. When she saw the broadcast, she sat alone in her small living room, tears rolling down her cheeks. She hadn't wanted attention. She didn't care for cameras or praise. But hearing the same man who had once stripped her dignity now honor her on national television, that was justice of a different kind. The next morning, she got a call. "Ms. Carter. This is St. Mary's Hospital. We'd like to offer you a position as a full-time pediatric caregiver. We heard about your story. Your compassion inspired us." Naomi covered her mouth, overwhelmed. For years she'd worked in silence, invisible. Now the world was seeing her, not as a maid, but as a healer. Meanwhile, Ethan insisted on writing her a letter himself. His handwriting was shaky, but determined. "Dear Naomi. You told me I wasn't broken. You were right. You also fixed something in my dad. I think we both started walking because of you. Love, Ethan. When she received it, she pressed the letter to her heart and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Months later, Charles and Margaret invited Naomi and her son, Malik, to the mansion for dinner, a gesture that would have once seemed impossible. The evening air was soft and gold, the scent of jasmine drifting through the open patio. As they sat together, a wealthy white family and a working-class black mother with her boy, the contrast was striking, but the distance was gone. Malik cracked jokes that made Ethan laugh until he nearly fell out of his chair. Naomi smiled through quiet tears. Charles raised his glass. To healing, the kind that starts with truth. Naomi lifted hers, meeting his gaze. And to listening, because that's where healing starts. The clink of their glasses sounded like an ending and a beginning all at once. When the evening ended, Naomi and Malik walked toward the car. Ethan called after them from the porch. "Naomi." She turned. "Thank you for whispering," he said. "It saved my life." Her smile trembled. "Then keep whispering, baby. The world still needs to listen." As she drove away, the mansion behind her no longer felt like a place of judgment. It felt like proof that even the hardest hearts can bend, that truth, spoken softly, can echo loud enough to change everything. Charles stood watching from the doorway, the wind brushing through his hair. For the first time in his life, he didn't see himself as a man of power, just a man humbled by grace. And somewhere in the quiet of that night, as the lights of Atlanta shimmered in the distance, a whisper seemed to rise through the wind, Naomi's old prayer, carried on by memory, steady and kind. "The broken shall rise, and the blind shall see. What the world buries, the Lord sets free." Charles closed his eyes and let the sound settle deep into his chest. The same whisper that once terrified him now felt like peace. He understood now what Naomi had always known: the most powerful miracles don't shout. They whisper. And when the world finally listens, everything changes. Thanks for watching, but don't just scroll past this. Hit subscribe, because the next story, it'll make you question everything you thought you knew about power and justice.